Should we press literally Jesus' warning that whoever remarries commits adultery? We'll need to look at the passages, but think of the implications. If this is literal, then all remarriages are adulterous, not just the wedding, but the marriage. Therefore, his followers should break up second or third marriages and so forth. Imagine the pastoral implications of this doctrine, at least in my country, but also this would have been true in Corinth and places like that in the first century. Mark chapter 10, verse 11. Anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery against her. Notice the part against her. Such divorce is not a victimless crime. It's wrong because it wrongs an innocent party. In that culture, a wife could be divorced for almost any reason and had little economic recourse once divorced. God didn't design our hearts to be meant to be broken. He didn't want us to break our covenants with each other. But what does commits adultery literally mean? Well, it can only mean that they're still married in God's sight, if it's literal. Anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery against her. Well, what does adultery mean? If Dedrick is married to Shamika and he sleeps with Shonda, that's literal adultery. If Dedrick divorces Shamika to marry Shonda, that's also considered adultery in this saying, as if Dedrick remains married to Shonda in God's sight. Even more troubling, if the marriage is indissoluble, then even the innocent party remains bound to the marriage. Anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery, Luke 16:18 says, and the man who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Now, is this literal or is it hyperbole? Hyperbole is rhetorical overstatement. Well, Jesus did often use rhetorical overstatement, and we can give a few examples of that. The context of the divorce saying in Matthew 5:32 is, everybody agrees, hyperbole. Jesus' other teachings assume the dissolubility of marriage. Now, when I say that, I don't mean you're allowed to do it, but that you're not actually still married to the same person. So we'll look at those examples. The woman at the well, the exception clause, where Jesus makes an exception in Matthew, Paul's freedom to recognize a different exception, and even the very context of the verse we started with, Mark chapter 10 and verse 11. Now, some people take everything literally, like, what do you mean, where's the bathroom? Where's the kitchen? I told you we were moving into a bedroom community. Or people read wrong meanings into things. Why did you put off my ordination? Well, you were a layperson, and now you're being delayed. Thank you, sir, for your diet plan, but that's not what I meant by us having an unusually large student body. Jesus often used hyperbole. Can a camel really fit through a needle's eye? I suppose if you squeeze it really tight and drip it through, that's where we get chamomile tea. Did Pharisees really gulp down camel's whole? I would really need Tums. How often did Jesus' followers move literal mountains? Which actually was a figure of speech back then for what was virtually impossible. So it was already understood as hyperbole. The context of the divorce saying in Matthew 5:32 is hyperbole. If your right eye causes you to sin, oh, that's my left eye. If your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. It didn't cause me to sin. And throw it away. If your right hand causes you to sin, that's this one, cut it off and throw it away. Now, few of you seem to have taken this literally. I mean, we could deal with that. But, you know, I look around and it looks to me like most of you still have both of your eyes. So Jesus' other teachings assume the dissolubility of marriage. So that was the context of that one. But Jesus' other teachings assume the dissolubility of marriage. Jesus doesn't say to the woman at the well, you were married once and you've lived with 5 guys since then. Rather, he says, you were married 5 times, but are just living with somebody now. Oh, Maybe he didn't mean that literally when he said you were married 5 times. Or maybe he didn't, but one way or the other, one of these sayings can't be meant literally. So likewise, the exception clause, Matthew 5:32 and 19:9. Whoever divorces his wife except on the grounds of unfaithfulness commits adultery if they remarry. Well, divorce by ancient definition meant freedom to remarry. So the question at issue was the validity of the divorce. If the innocent party is validly divorced, though, how can the guilty party still be married to them? Paul recognizes another exception. Jesus says the believer is not free to divorce or abandon a faithful spouse, but Paul qualifies this. If the spouse leaves, the believer is not under bondage. Well, what does that mean? Does it mean you're not tied up? I mean, you weren't tied up anyway, literally, physically, but this is the exact language of ancient Jewish divorce contracts for freedom to remarry. So documents from the Judean desert that have been found, Mishnah Gittin 9, so on. Paul takes it as a general statement of principle that may be qualified under certain circumstances. So, like, if it's not you breaking up the marriage, this doesn't apply to you. 4 of the 6 divorce texts in the New Testament explicitly make exceptions, which should suggest something about, yes, there can be exceptions. What Matthew's and Paul's exceptions have in common is an innocent party. In Matthew's case, it was adultery, although the term that he uses actually is a little bit wider than adultery. Some people try to make it narrower, like premarital sex or something like, but it's actually a wider term in Greek. It's not qualified in the context. When you have a wider term that's not qualified in the context, it often has a wider meaning. So Matthew's exception, adultery, which was a standard charge in antiquity, which rendered the other person innocent. Abandonment is what Paul talks about. And we might add abuse if we're extrapolating from the same principle here. Now, keep in mind, this is not like saying you need to divorce. So, the spouse has a one-night stand. That doesn't mean you have to divorce. There still can be hope for restoration. And yeah, the spouse makes a joke at your expense. Please don't say, he abused me, she abused me, I'm out. But this is talking about something more serious like physical abuse. So in any case, these are serious exceptions, but what they have in common is an innocent party. It's the other person breaking the marriage covenant. Again, Jesus' remark to the Samaritan woman also adds to this idea. Mark 10:11, where we started, speaks as if marriage is indissoluble. But Mark chapter 10 and verse 9 recognizes that it is, in fact, dissoluble. Not that you're allowed to, but that you're not still married. So chapter 10 and verse 9 says, what God has joined together, let no one separate. The point in both cases is not that it can't be dissolved, but that it should not be dissolved. So the rhetorical function of the language, so it doesn't contradict the rest of what he says, is demand. Preserve your marriage. It's not cosmic law that the marriage remains intact, even when the covenant is irreparably broken by the other partner. So summary, don't break up your marriage. At the same time, God doesn't hold responsible the person against whom the marriage is broken. And God knows what's really in everybody's heart. So don't cheat.